In the last video, we spent roughly 10 minutes to understand why Plastic gives statuses to files like private and edit. I did this because I think that it will be much easier for us to understand what comes now. Once again, I'm in a new Unity project. Again, Unity 6 with the default 3D core template with the universal render pipeline. But this should not really matter. No matter what Unity version you're on or what template you chose, you will have some amount of private files initially. Now observe what happens when I do the following. In my assets folder, I select everything and delete it. Unity is not really happy about this, and what it does is it automatically generates two files which it needs for the render pipeline. We are not interested in the render pipeline at all, but the point I want to make is that now and then Unity will automatically generate files for you. You saw one example just a second ago with the two files we currently see in the assets folder. Another example is when you create a new Unity project and you see a bunch of initial files. The rule of thumb is that for Plastic, those generated files will be private. So if we need them in our repository, we have to manually add them. Typically, now my real work on the Unity project would start, and I might first save the currently open scene. When I do that, this time something else happens, which is that the scene file and the folders that were generated are automatically set to edit. And from a pure Plastic perspective, this is not what we would expect. We just added some folders and a file, so they should be private. But Unity assumes that the work you do in the assets folder is real work that you probably want to add to the next change set, so it automatically sets the edit flag for you. The same thing happens when I add other files like a material or a script or even a new folder. So, key takeaway here is Unity generated stuff is private. Stuff that you add to the assets folder is added automatically. With the stuff we know so far, this is not really complicated. However, particularly in the beginning of your project, when you maybe just want to try out a few things and not worry about version control too much yet, it quickly gives you dozens of files in the pending changes view, which can be a bit annoying. I showed you a quick fix for that, which is just filtering out the private files. For those generated files, this should never be an issue, since even if you checked out your repository from another computer without the private files, Unity would just regenerate them. The advantage of that setting is that we can now see what we actually did much clearer. In this video, however, I don't want that setting. Instead, I want to talk about what happens when we don't like Unity's default behavior, or we made some mistake that we need to correct. So let's say, for example, I didn't need the folder I just added. Obviously, I can just delete the folder and the file will disappear from the pending changes. We would expect that. What we might not expect is what happens when we want to get rid of the material, right-click on it and choose Undo. What exactly are we undoing? We just added the material, so we might think that undoing means deleting it. But in Plastic, as we already saw, this is not the case. What happens instead is that the file itself is not touched, but its file status is set to private. So the file is still in our workspace, it is just removed from the next check-in. If we want to remove it for good, we would still have to delete it. Now we can sort the files by status, which gives us all the edit files together. What we haven't talked about yet is that there is a separate entry for the folders itself and for the containing files, like the scenes folder and the scenes file. But obviously the changes were not independent. So what would happen if I just set the scenes folder back to private and then checked in? Well, the simple answer is that this wouldn't make any sense, and Plastic doesn't allow that. What we get is a warning that there are dependent changes which will also be undone. At the time of this recording, there is a bug, however, which prevented me to undo it automatically, so I had to manually select the folder and the file and undo it. Now they are private again. If you want to go the other way and add them back again, in the Unity plugin, this is not called add, but checkout. One more example of Plastic's rather unfortunate naming strategy. The effect, however, is that they are added. Let me now go back to the state before we added anything. To sum up what we did in this video, let me prove to you that Unity has a special Plastic behavior for the assets folder. If I open the project in the Explorer and add a file outside of the assets folder, we get standard Plastic behavior. The file is private. When I do the same thing inside the assets folder, the file is added. Combined with the behavior of generated files, this explains the slightly confusing behavior when you create a new Unity project. We are almost done with our discussion on private files, but I owe you one explanation why I am still pretending that those first three files here don't exist. This is because, as you can see, they have a totally different state, which is not private, not added, and not controlled. There are several other file states for files which are already checked in and which have been modified. I think it will be easier to talk about them once we covered some other aspects, but don't worry, we will definitely talk about them. Hopefully the last two videos help you to get started with Plastic in Unity, and hopefully I see you in the next video.